The subcompact sedan is unique to India, and there are quite a few major players in the segment. The Maruti Suzuki Dzire is of course the leader with over 20,000 units sold every month year on year, and Honda recently updated the Amaze with the second generation. And now Ford, not to be left behind, has updated the Ford Figo Aspire too. So how does it stack up against its contemporaries? Well, for starters, I personally like this new grille. It goes well with the global Ford design language and makes the Aspire look a little bit more grown up. The Dzire too has a similar gaping front end, while the Amaze of course is the most different of the lot with that flat bulldog-like nose that does get its polarized views. That said, both the Dzire and the Amaze get LED daytime running lights and the Aspire does not, a fact that we find quite bewildering. All three also run on 15-inch alloy wheels, but while the Amaze and the Aspire get a set of plain silver alloys, the Dzire gets a lovely two-tone, a much better looking one in my opinion.
It's great to see how these subcompact sedans have evolved in terms of design from their last generation to their current generation. Of course, the Amaze looks far better. Dzire, of course, looks a whole bunch better than the last generation. But in terms of sheer design, when you put all these three together, it's the Figo Aspire that's still sort of the nicest of the lot. It still looks most contemporary and most modern, but they really have missed an opportunity when they did the facelift up front, because they could have easily added in a set of LED tail lamps, maybe a little bit more in terms of just some design element on the boot, maybe a little lip spoiler, and that would have made the car look so much nicer. But as I mentioned, in terms of sheer design, in terms of pure design and not elements as such, the Aspire is still the better car. In terms of elements, you do have the Amaze that has this nice sort of boomerang design there, or the Dzire that gets LED tail lamps as standard on all variants. Even the LXi, the base model, gets those LED tail lamps.
While the exterior bits do have some similarities, the interior on these three cars are completely different from one another. So let's start with the Aspire. Typically Ford in its approach, the dashboard has a high-set touchscreen, well-laid buttons and quite a lot of small storage spaces. The screen in particular, as with all Ford products, is the best in class and has a very good user interface, and to top it all off, it has a great touch feedback too. The Dzire on the other hand is the most plain looking of the lot here, but it also has a sense of upmarketness that might be missing in the others, and that is probably because of the wood inserts that it has. The screen is larger than on the Aspire, and while the interface isn't as good, both these cars get Apple CarPlay and Android Auto.
One of the big bane of contentions for the last generation Honda Amaze was the fact that the interior just wasn't up to par. This new one though is extremely cool, and I'm really glad that the sort of crazy design elements of Hondas of the past have sort of come in. So you get this squarish horn button, very cool design. I really genuinely do like this little thing. Even the instrument clusters, very clean, very modern, very contemporary looking. And even though this is the top of the line automatic version, it doesn't get the touchscreen infotainment system, but on the manual you do get that touchscreen. But on the whole, the Amaze has always been a very practical vehicle, lots of little cubby holes, a lot of storage space on each side. And now with this new dashboard, I think the interior is probably the best in its segment, just in terms of pure design.
Since we are already in the Amaze, let's start by telling you how that one drives. And the answer for this, and honestly all the other cars here, is that it actually drives really well. In fact, it is surprising how almost everything else in this segment has now become a great car overall. Power comes from that tried and tested 1.2-litre IV-Tech petrol engine that makes 89 brake horsepower and 110 Nm of peak torque, and that puts it in between the Aspire and the Dzire. That said, it is the least fuel efficient of the two with just 19.5 km on offer.
Now, all the subcompact sedans that we have on the comparison test today are essentially the same engine size, 1.2 litre. and they're all naturally aspirated, and the engine size is the same because of course the government regulation states you can't have a bigger engine than that if you're in that sub 4 meter category, or you won't get the excise benefits. That said, as with everything else in life, some engines are of course more equal than others, and that's exactly the case with the Dragon series engine that Ford has debuted on the Freestyle, and now same engine you get on the Aspire. It's the most powerful engine of the lot in this category, and it's got 95 horsepower and 120 Newton meters, and that horsepower figure is actually considerably higher than the likes of the highest selling car in the segment, which of course is the Dzire at 82 horsepower. And it's not just powerful on paper, it actually is a lot better to drive too, a lot more responsive, revs much nicer. Even though that Dzire engine is really good, and we're all of course very used to it, this engine has a lot of poke in the top top end of the rev range too, and that's the kind of engine I like.
Surprisingly though, even though it is the most powerful of the lot here, it also manages to eke out a decent fuel efficiency figure of 20.4 kilometers per litre, which actually is quite commendable.
And that brings us to Mr. Familiarity right here, which is of course the Maruti Dzire. Now there's a reason this car sells so well. Of course it's because of the far-reaching sales and service outlets that Maruti has, but also because it is a great car. Now it might not be the most powerful of the lot, but it is one of the nicer ones to drive because the engine is so smooth, so refined, and we're all used to this engine by now. And because of that, we actually know how to wriggle it into performing really well. That said, what it does really have going for it is that fuel efficiency figure. 22 kilometers per litre, not just on paper, but it's also very fuel efficient in real life.
India is evolving as a market, and automatics are getting more and more popular, and it comes as no surprise that all three of these are available with an Autobox option on the petrol engine, and they are all as different as can be. The Dzire is an AMT, the Amaze is a CVT, and the Aspire gets a larger 1.5 litre petrol engine with a traditional torque converter. That said, the Aspire does not get a diesel auto option, whereas the Dzire and the Amaze get the AMT and the CVT diesel, a first in the world, respectively. Picking a winner between the Dzire, Aspire and the Amaze is a difficult job. Each has its own positives. The Aspire drives the best and has 6 airbags on the top spec, making it the safest too. The Amaze of course has that very tempting diesel CVT amongst being really well designed on the interior, and of course the Dzire, apart from being a jack of all trades, has that Maruti juggernaut to fall back upon in terms of service. That said, as an all-round approach, it is still the Amaze that takes this test by a whisker due to its overwhelming ability as an all-round package. Yes, we know some of you don't like the way it looks, but it is still our winner in the subcompact sedan shootout and still the benchmark.